Okay, good afternoon from Bonn, Germany. Happy to have Bradley Sherman here. Welcome, Bradley, to an audience of experts and startups around the aging place. We know us for a while, I guess 15 years or so, so I know you very well. If you could start with a little introduction of yourself, and then we agreed that you read a part which is interesting for my audience here, especially the economics, the eldernomics, as I learned from your book.
Yeah.
And later on, you're open for questions for the audience. So I give it up to you. Welcome here in Europe.
Thanks, Frank, and good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see you here. Obviously, I wish we could be together in person, but thanks to this pandemic that doesn't seem like it wants to go away, I'm here secluded in my home in Washington, D.C., just a few thousand miles away. As Frank said, my name is Bradley Sherman. For those of you who don't know me, I've been in the aging space for a long time, a lot longer than people may realize. In fact, about 25 years. If you're trying to guess my age, I'm 44. I noticed demographic change when I was in college, in large part because, like most people, I had a personal connection to it. My grandparents were in nursing care at the time, and I became fascinated by their experience and became more attuned to the aging world around me. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and went to school in Washington, D.C. And as I would drive through the countryside between the two cities, I would notice a population that was getting older, whiter, and poorer. And I saw more and more people who were in later life, in advanced age, working in jobs that I had assumed during my childhood were reserved almost exclusively for young people. Jobs pumping gas, waiting tables, cleaning restrooms, all of these jobs being done by people in their 70s and even 80s. I made aging my career. That's morphed into a career around demographics, starting with the trade association Leading Age, which is formerly known as the American Association of Homes and Services for the Aging, and then on to AARP, which to this day, despite its contraction in size, remains the largest membership organization for people over 50 in the world, with I think about 36 million members today and an annual operating revenue of about $2 billion. Now, I spent 15 years there, which is crazy, but I spent that time building relationships across Europe, into Asia, and even into Latin America. I learned from the best about what was happening to our world. And perhaps the one thing I understood more than anything else was that demographic change is happening everywhere, to everyone, and it's very hard to avoid it. So about 3 years ago, I realized that my point of view around aging was changing to be more focused on one that was centered around demographic change, because an aging population just doesn't affect the old, it affects the middle-aged and the young as well. So in this journey, I departed AARP. I started my own consultancy, which is called the Super Age. It's a research and advisory firm that helps people understand demographic change and how it impacts their bottom line. We help find operational efficiencies that include hiring older persons, which has become even more important today with the mass exodus of older workers from the workforce. But we also help with innovation and design strategies, as well as marketing and communications ones. This week, we're also excited to announce that we're launching Kiba, which is a full-service inclusive design firm that is centered around the areas of housing, hospitality, and the workplace. We'll be working with major employers as well as major properties in that endeavor. Now, a little bit about the book, because that's why you're all here today. The book, The Super Age, Decoding Our Demographic Destiny, is broken into 3 main sections. The first is a history of age. The second is demographic dystopia. And the third is a new demographic order. The history of age is a conversation about how we got to where we are today. It focuses on our long-term attitudes towards old people, which have remained consistently inconsistent over the course of humanity. It talks about our obsession with youth that has always been around, but is in perhaps its most hyper form today. as well as the scientific and social achievements that solved for infant and youth mortality and allowed a greater number of people to live into adulthood and eventually into old age. It goes past the common narratives around aging and focuses on one that's more centered on demographics, primarily that our population, because of these solutions to youth and infant mortality, quadrupled in size over the course of the past 100 years. It's not just about living longer on average, it's that there's a lot more of us too. And in fact, there are more older people on the planet today than ever before in human history. And of course, if you know demographics well, the definition for a super age society is 1 out of 5 people are over the age of 65. And we're hitting that number for at least 35 countries by the end of this decade. The second section of the book is focused on demographic dystopia. Essentially, what happens if we do nothing? What happens if we don't close the longevity gap between the rich and the poor, between marginalized groups and non-marginalized groups, between women and men? What happens if we don't fully understand and embrace the differences that occur between the countryside and the cities? Because this is a widening gap in virtually every country rather, across the planet. And in many ways, the countryside offers us a cautionary tale of what happens if we do nothing to embrace demographic change and to guard against its destructive forces. Because in fact, demographic change can be destructive for communities if it's not managed properly. And then of course, the third section of the book focuses on a new demographic order, this novel period of the super age, where we can experience, where we can live longer, where we can do more than ever before in human history. And as Frank said, it presents a unique market opportunity for businesses that want to get engaged in expanding their market base, expanding their consumer base, and serving more people. Because it's not just about people getting older, it's about the size of the total population. And in fact, we're starting to see populations contract already in countries like Japan, which loses about 500,000 people a year. China is already losing population. But in most countries, the population growth has slowed to just a trickle. Those that are maintaining population growth are either doing so by immigration or they're doing so because of high birth rates. But those high birth rates are rare. They tend to be focused in countries in Africa and a handful of countries in Latin America, and that's it. So by sometime this decade, we can expect the global population to top out around 10 billion people, just 2 billion more. And once we hit that number, the entire global population will actually start to contract. So with that in mind, if you're a smart business, and I don't know how many are yet in this period of the super age, there are a handful that are mentioned in the book. Frank has asked me to read from the chapter on eldernomics in the section, A New Demographic Order, the cost of doing nothing. Meeting the basic needs to belong, regardless of age, will become more essential in the super age. Failure to do so could create a series of crises that could threaten business stability, weaken social cohesion, and disrupt national economies. Economies could stagnate, or worse, they could fall into recession or depression. If that happens, their governments would likely lose their position in the global economy, their credit rating and borrowing power would come under scrutiny, and their social welfare systems could collapse. The result would be an older, sicker, and poorer society. It is simply bad business not to consider that the older population, when properly engaged, can propel societies and economies into the future. What stands in the way? For one, a mix of dated historical attitudes, poor public policy, and ageism, both implicit and explicit, that negatively impacts business decisions and economic productivity. If nothing is done to combat these things, taxpayers will be left to foot the bill for the hidden and not so hidden costs that result from the loss of economic productivity, as well as increased healthcare costs associated with joblessness and isolation. If governments and businesses stand still, the current path presents an existential threat to economic growth and political stability. By the time the first 35 countries are part of the super age in 2030, the global talent shortage could exceed 85.2 million people. which will cost trillions of dollars in economic activity if something isn't done to recruit and retain older talent. The industries that are projected to be hardest hit include many that are considered to have knowledge-intensive jobs today, such as those in the financial services sector, where lack of workers could result in $435 billion in unrealized economic output. Even the OECD, which to this day maintains a mandatory retirement age for their own workers, agrees with this idea. In its own research projects that OECD nations can expect to see their GDP contract by an average of 10% over the course of the next 3 decades if businesses and governments do nothing to address the demographic change. Some economies could contract by nearly 20%. Even with age-inclusive strategies, it may be too late for some countries, such as Iceland, South Korea, Japan, and Singapore, to turn their economic contraction around because of other factors that normally contribute to growth, such as immigration. Countries that lack pro-immigration policies may grow more reliant on robots, and their domestic demand for goods and services may contract with fewer people available to purchase. The economic projection should be a cautionary tale, not only for those in the OECD, but also for the other 150 so countries in the world. Without action, demographic change can have a catastrophic effect on a nation's credit rating, a subject that isn't often discussed. Rating agencies provide global investors with information on the ability of corporations and countries to pay back debt. For example, how likely they are to make interest payments on time or to default. It should come as no surprise that the demographic outlook of a nation is directly linked to a number of economic risk factors. Rating agencies look closely at debt incurred via social welfare programs, such as healthcare and pensions. The debt of these programs is directly influenced by the dependency ratio via social welfare programs, such as healthcare and pensions. The debt of these programs is directly influenced by the dependency ratio, a term that expresses the number of people who are not working. Working to support the people who are not. It is intimately linked to the ageist policies that have systemically removed older people from the workforce since the middle of the last century. 10 countries currently have AAA rating, the highest rating which directly affects the borrowing power. They are Canada, Denmark, Germany, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Singapore, Sweden, and Switzerland. Each of these countries is already in the super age or will be entering in this decade, and they face a downgrading of their credit score if they do not do more to take their problems head on. Being downgraded has a big impact on a country's ability to borrow money. Investors see it as a riskier bet and demand a higher return to lend to it. If any of these countries loses its high credit rating, it will likely be due to an inability to adjust its economy and social security systems to the new reality. The shrinkage in workforce participation due to population aging and outdated and ageist policies and practices has already put most of these countries on a path to facing labor shortages over the course of the next decade. This has already made it difficult for some companies to find enough of the right talent. One option, which has been exercised in the past, is to increase the retirement age for pension beneficiaries and force people to work longer. Many countries, including the United States, have done this gradually. However, many experts, including myself, believe this is like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. There are always better, more equitable, and more nuanced ways to approach the demographic challenge. And I believe that businesses, especially large corporations, can play an oversized, transformative role in making change. Governments should financially support their citizens' skill and career transitions throughout the life course, and businesses should work to make themselves as ergonomically and generationally friendly as possible, so the contributions of each individual can be maximized for as long as possible. This is why I ask every organization that I work with to commit to a set of principles that encourage it to tackle ageism head-on, support its employees' life needs, and hold other businesses in its supply chain accountable. It's an approach that my good friend Fabrice Hudard about leadership shared with me when he was working with the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights on its LGBTQ+ strategy with corporations. They include respect all people regardless of age as contributors and customers, work to eliminate age-based discrimination in the workplace, support employees through caregiving leave and continuous education, refuse to support or engage with known ageist organizations, including those in the supply chain, encourage and establish the development of policies, practices, products, and services that help people live better longer. The interesting part of this section is that this was written before I think the harshest effects of the pandemic really started to show up in terms of our workforce. So there's some degree of prescience that appears in this passage. But obviously the situation around the needs of the workforce right now are dramatic, especially in places like the United States, where we've had millions of people depart the workforce. Some folks have called it the Great Resignation. I think this is a misread. It in many ways was a great retirement or a great redundancy, which has led to a greater realignment, part of which includes a great resignation. Workers in particular have a unique bargaining seat now at the table. They have more leverage than they've ever had, at least since the post-war period. And I think we can anticipate that businesses will be actively seeking older workers to come back into the workforce in force, not only because they see the market opportunity of the super age, but because they need bodies to fill the seats, hands to work the machines. So I look at this period as one of great opportunity and great possibility. So Frank, I leave some questions up to you.
Thank you very much, Bradley. I just saw this morning New York Times, a big report of China shrinking and what it means to the country. I saw a question already in the chat from Ian. I know you're a bit slim in time, Ian. Could you demute yourself and raise your question? Just open your mic, or I will do. It's just Ian's account and he's not in, so he put his question in his chat and he asked you that you have talked to many experts around the globe, super age challenges. What country stands out in your opinion and why?
It's a great question.
I guess Germany.
Yeah, I mean, there are countries that are doing very well. There is no country that is exceeding above and beyond any other country in the world. I would say that in terms of older workers in particular, I think Germany is doing one of the better jobs in the world because there's a natural supply and demand issue. And typically when action is spurred within a business, it's because there's an economic threat, a clear and present threat to their business operations. So the best examples that I've seen over the course of my working life have been primarily in Germany. There are some in the US, there are a handful in Asia, quite a few in Singapore, for example. But Germany tends to stand out above and beyond the rest. And that's in large part because major industry has embraced the change, starting with BMW, a luxury automaker, a stalwart of the German industry. But that trickled into Mercedes-Benz quite quickly. Now Porsche as well, where factories are being built with older workers in mind, and with a heavy focus on extending the working lives of all workers, not just older workers, all workers, because this new demographic reality demands that we work longer. And most people don't like to hear that. Most people don't like to hear that they're going to have to work past 65, 70, 75, even to 80. But that is a reality because we're living a healthier, longer life. We should be able to contribute for longer periods of time. In terms of innovation, I see Karen Etkin on here, who just came out with a phenomenal book on AI and aging. Hi, Karen. I think Israel has done a really phenomenal job in their startup community around aging tech. I think if you also take a close look at the United States, you'll find amazing examples of technological innovations, but also analog solutions coming fast and furious. And of course, you know, the places where you see some great national investment I think Nicola Palmerini is on this morning, if he's not, from the National Innovation Center on Aging in the UK, where the UK government has made an incredible investment across the board to improve the number of healthy years that people are living. So this is a grand challenge that they're funding to actually compress morbidity across the board. So they're seeing some really cool stuff develop in that country as well. But to your question, is any country doing it particularly well across the board? The answer is a flat no. There is still an incredible wage gap for women that shows up later in life. There is still an incredible longevity gap that shows up for marginalized populations virtually everywhere that has multicultural societies. And there are still some giant holes in how we deliver solutions to people who are living longer. We still tend, despite I think all of our efforts, we still tend to find businesses that are unwilling to consider older populations, or as I like to say, generationally diverse populations in their design process. They tend to focus squarely on designing just for the needs of older people. And if there's one thing we found consistently across the board is when you do that, you're not going to excite, you're not going to inspire the population. This new population, and there's a chapter of the book that focuses on this, which I call the middle plus, some people call the modern elder, others call super agers. These people don't want to be seen as old. And they are doing just about everything they can to fight against it, including exercising the power of their wallet. These people, 65 plus men in particular, are engaged with Apple devices more than any other demographic. That suggests something about their interest in technology. The stated market group for Peloton, the connected exercise device, is 35 to 65, but we know that number skews higher, skews older. They're intentionally going after the market, but they're building a product that looks amazing. Time and time after again, I tell my own clients, stop thinking of older people as a separate and distinct group. Think of them as part of us. They are part of us. They are human and they want to be with us. So whatever we can do to make that happen makes our products and services better at the end of the day.
Cool, thank you. During the chat, I saw Ulrike. I guess you got a question if you unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I was quite surprised that you were naming Germany. Hello, I'm from Hamburg, and I'm, as the generational ambassador, I'm working on that theme, ageism, and also helping a little bit out that the best agers and the 50 plus get a better image. But in the end, I can see in the first part, the politics, of course, want the people to work longer, and also the advertising agencies. I've been most part of my life in advertising. They love them as well because they know that they spend a lot of money. But as workers and as people they are looking for in the markets, there I can say, no, this is not the truth. They are not looking for them, and the AI is actually the best method to keep them out. And that's why my question to you would be, do you see some possibility that the opinions from the companies and the politicians come together? Because of course they have different interests. Thank you.
Of course they do. They're never perfectly aligned. But I will say though, you know, if we're talking Germany and the US, you know, we do have, I would say Germany's economy and politics are better aligned than America's are, for example. That being said, I think we have to get to some of the root questions here. Why are older people let go from work? It's not always about them being older. In many regards, it's about them costing more. That's fairly consistent across the board. And, you know, is that ageist? I don't know. It's hard to say because I don't think that that's the exclusive reason that people are being let go. The concern that you raised is about the rehiring. And I think that that's the bigger problem for us to solve. We know that older workers over the age of 50 take roughly twice as long to get back into work than their younger peers. And we know that when they do return to work, they're typically earning about half as much as they did when they were in the workforce before. So what can we do to combat this? Well, I think that there are solutions that come from all social partners, including the individual. So this might be a very American point of view, but individuals do need to keep up on their skills. They do need to maintain a presence in the workforce that shows them as reasonable, rational, resilient actors. And they do need to present themselves in a way in which they would want to be seen. And now I'm not saying that you should go out and color your hair or buy the youngest clothes or slap on some makeup in the morning, but I am saying that the behaviors that you had when you were younger at your peak career should extend into later life. I often say, for the individual at least, life is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you think for one moment that race gets any easier at the end, you are wrong. That is the hardest point in the race. It is the hardest point in the race. You've got to keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. And you do that by putting your nose to the grindstone, which is a very American euphemism. Focus on your work, focus on your work. And I want you to maintain this idea that you do have relevancy and you do have a real big connection with the place that you're employed by. Now, for the recruitment question, this is a bit stickier. And this is a bit more problematic because the AI is in many ways designed to root out people that have too much experience. We also know that corporations, I don't think through any major fault of their own, are putting in coded ageist language. Recent graduate, meals offered on campus. These types of words, these types of language suggest to older people that they're not even qualified for the job. And that actually causes people not to apply. So it's a bit of a mix here. Carrie Hannon, who's an American author and a friend of mine, she writes about this process for older workers, what they can do as individuals. And I touch on some of this in the book. But above all else, you have to maintain your curiosity. You have to stand up for projects when they come about in the workplace. You cannot, as we say, rest on your laurels. It is a two-way street. Now, what can governments do? That's the last part, I think, of your question. What governments can do is governments can put in policies that encourage employers to recruit from older demographics. The UK does this with its government hiring policies. So not only for the government are they working on age diversity, but when they award government contracts, apologies for tripping over my words, when they award government contracts, age diversity is included in the same way as gender diversity, sexuality, race. It's a qualifier for a government contractor to get business within the government. It improves their standing. And that's been around for some time. Where I will say, from an outsider looking into Germany in particular, what really excites me about what Germany has done, although I would say it's probably a mixed bag for Germans, is this idea of creating a universal age discrimination law. In the United States, there's age discrimination is only illegal for people over the age of 40. Well, that's pretty insane. It doesn't make any sense at all. Yes, it is on average women face gendered ageism or perceive they face gendered ageism around 45 is when it starts in the US, but 40 is still radically young. And we know that perhaps where the most ageism tends to come in the workforce actually comes from the center. It's not the young people, it's not the older workers, it's people who are like in that 35 to 50 age group that make up the bulk of the workforce. They're hiring people that look, act, have same generational touch points, same technological understanding as them. They are the center of the bell curve. So when we're looking to advocate going forward, both from the private sector and the public sector, as well as the individual, These are the folks that we really need to get after, these people that are in that 35 to 50-ish age group that are running HR departments, that are middle managers. These are the ones that really need to have their minds changed. And I'll tell you what, nothing makes somebody's mind change like the market. And I'll tell you right now in the United States, employers are scrambling to figure out how to hire workers. And this narrative has slowly, I would say slowly, over the course of COVID, everything either feels really fast or really slow. This narrative has developed that seems slow, but it's actually really fast in the timeline of life, where television media is starting to talk about the value of older workers. They're starting to show more regularly how important it is to engage older populations in our popular culture, in our society, in our workforce, in media. And because of that, we say something here that's quite common: representation matters. Older folks are showing up. Older people are showing up on TV. They're showing up in the workforce. And once that starts happening, it's like a drumbeat. And it tends to improve when the economy's weird, when there's a supply imbalance. So when I take a look back at the history of the world, I take a look at the history of the United States in particular, the post-war period was a golden period for workers. And the post-COVID period, although we're not fully there yet, is going to be a golden period for workers too. In 1950 in the United States, men who made up the bulk of the workforce over the age of 65 had a nearly 50% participation rate. Nearly 50%. So 1 out of 2 workers over the age of 60, 1 out of 2 people over the age of 65 was working in the US in 1950. But by 1990, that had bottomed out to around 14%. That's changing. That's going to grow over time. And I think that's the biggest positive to see from this. We need a little bit of patience, but we need a hell of a lot of advocacy. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Bradley. I think you and me, we both are in the business for, I don't know, 20 years. We are so patient, and we still are, but it's really sometimes a little pain somewhere. Who's next? Who got a question for Bradley? Please unmute yourself and feel free to ask.
Hi, it's Bogusia Chewińska from the Polish Institute of the Silver Economy.
Welcome.
And very happy to be here, also with my colleague Marzena, who is with us today. Great, Bradley, to also be the partner of the launch for the EMEA, the Polish Institute, and our certificate for the services that we run as one of the tools. What I would like to ask about is how to talk to businesses to bring their focus to raise awareness of the issue. Of course, in the Institute, what we do is we develop programs and tools to raise this awareness all the time. But from your perspective, from your experience, and maybe also to bring to have this discussion around us here, what language to use to open the eyes, basically.
Yeah.
Because just one two words more. If you look at the public sector, it is more or less looked after in terms of the policies, and of course it could be always better. But the businesses, they need the bottom-up, prompt. Mm-hmm. So what would it be, or what kind of language to use?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that one consistent thing, and thank you for the question. One consistent thing that we know is that business has its own language, nonprofits have their own language, and government has their own language. So bridging that language is bridging, the conversation with a common language, a lingua franca, around the demographic change that's happening in older populations, is something that's really the responsibility of nonprofits in particular, perhaps government too, because business hasn't quite seen the demographic change that we know exists. So when you talk about what is the lingua franca? What can the common language be in this period? Well, the common language for math, for science, is math. The common language around longevity is money. Economics, pure and simple. Numbers are the one thing that consistently businesses understand. You can't go into a room and say, wouldn't it be nice if we employed more older people? You'll get laughed out of the room. You can't go into a CEO's office and say, wouldn't it be great if you build products and services for older people? They just ignore you. What you have to go in with is a pretty hard business case that underlines the demographic trends as well as the economic opportunities that are there for business. And let me be clear, this isn't something that's new. This isn't something that I magically came up with overnight. This is something that I put into place when I was working at AARP 18 years ago, nearly 20 years ago. What we realized at the time was that our multi-governmental, intergovernmental, international institutions were speaking in a very ageist and derogative way towards older populations. You know, 20 years ago, the only thing you heard was silver tsunami and these conversations around despair that are going to happen when older populations depart the workplace. That's all you heard. So what we did is we spoke to these governmental organizations in the language of government. We told them about inclusion, modifying public policy. So they understood that if they undertook really slight modifications overall to improve efficiencies, to maybe delay retirements, they could save and they could create keep these older workers as net producers rather than net consumers of financial resources. With businesses, you need to understand the demographics and the economics surrounding a business before you can really have that solid conversation with them. So why are car manufacturers so good at working with older consumers? Why are they so good at it? Well, 50% of all, or I'm sorry, 2/3 of all new cars are purchased by people over the age of 50. Okay, that's why car companies are good at building cars for older people now. They also realize that, and all these innovations happen for a reason, because they realize they're smart. They understand that mobility is the first thing to go. And in a country like the United States, where most of our boomers reside in suburban communities, cars are essential to their physical, mental well-being, as well as their connectivity to the community. So my dad drives my dad crazy when I talk about this, but I think he's such a case study for this new period. My father had a stroke 3 years ago. The first thing he did was buy a Porsche Macan, a sports car. And yes, I can tell you without any embarrassment, although it mortifies me internally, that I told him that's crazy. I treated him like a child. But the reality was that car was built for him. It was built for his needs at that time. It had drive assist, multiple cameras, push button start. It gave him freedom. It gave him license. And when I asked him, Dad, why are you buying the car? He goes, well, it's safe. And I said, no. Why are you buying the car? He goes, well, it's beautiful. It's a sexy car. Well, it was only after then that I really dove into understanding what Porsche had done. And Porsche has built this multi-billion-dollar plant in Leipzig, Germany, that fully takes into account workers over the life course, that works to extend their working lives across the board, mostly through ergonomics, but also in policy. And the end result is you now have 16-year-olds working alongside 70-year-olds. And that mix of ideas helps build a better car. So extending the working lives of people is a core component to success, the economic success here. I can't underline that anymore. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Once you have older workers in, that empathy that understanding of their life experience, their lived experience, starts to bleed into process. When you incorporate them with intention into design, you build better products at the end of the day. In fact, it was German research, I think from 2019. I'm going to have to double check that number, where they looked at 147 different companies and found that age diverse companies perform better on the whole. But here's the deal. We know this is the case. We know this is the case already, because we've seen how gender diversity works in the workplace. It makes it better. We've seen racial diversity, how that improves the workplace at the end of the day. But I think for business, you want to improve the product. So you've got to show them a couple things to get to the fine point of this. You've got to show them the demographic reality, the economic need, as well as the market opportunity. Once they see those numbers, they tend to come around. You have to identify somebody that exists on or around the C-suite. Anyone who's a middle manager will typically not be able to move this internally. That's pretty consistent across the board. And whenever I take on a client personally, I like that client to commit to working on all three legs of the stool, which is HR practice, innovation and design, and marketing communications. I want those three teams as part of the process, because if we just do one vertical, if we just talk to one group, those learnings aren't necessarily going to seep into other parts of the business, and it's really a waste of everyone's time.
All right, great answer, Brady. I'd like to add, the good thing is if you go for the C-suite, it's most likely that your manager you talked with in his 50s or 60s, so he has a much better understanding of what you're talking about. So as younger managers get, as hard it might be in the most cases, that they understand what you're saying, and that's something we really have to take into account, that as closer you get to this group, you better understand it.
Yeah, but I want to make something abundantly clear. You have to make sure you don't lean on that as your selling point.
No.
Because time and time after again, we find that ageism or bias against older populations extends well into later life. I often tell the story of my grandfather who lived to be, he was a month short of his 91st birthday. And when he was in nursing care, the man across the hall who was born a month before him in 1914. And up until my grandfather's dying day, he referred to that man as the old guy across the hall. So don't assume that just because a CEO is 60, 65, or 70 plus, that they're going to have any more empathy towards older populations. In fact, they might think of them as redundant in many cases. They cost too much. They're not doing as much work as he is or she is. So don't lean on that as your only thing. Come loaded, like I said, with good statistics and a good business case that argues for the company really embracing this period of change.
Good point. So next question, please. Nobody? I have one in my mind, but I give you a sec.
Well, maybe Ingrid and Irma have questions, I think.
GM, shoot.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so maybe regarding that, because I understand the business case, but also regarding that empathy, like, do you have like a couple of tricks in your toolbox or a couple of examples that you use in, let's say, such a conversation with a C-suite to maybe build that empathy, even if, that person within the C-suite is 60 or 70? Because like you said, empathy towards this group is not something natural.
Yeah, empathy tends to bleed in when you talk about a loved one. Again, it's a question of who you're trying to serve, I suppose. You should be your fundamental starting point. That should be where you start the question. If you're looking to serve an older population exclusively, then you need to lean into what's your family experience. Have you had a loved one that had a need that wasn't filled? That's when empathy, I think, can start to bleed into the conversation. But remember, again, these men and women in particular are part of this middle plus group. They're an emerging life stage. They're more active and healthier than ever before. They are pushing against the idea of old age. And in reality, they're not old. I can't stress that enough. They're a new breed of person. And in fact, research out of Finland illustrates that demonstratively over a longitudinal study that suggests that we are in fact physically younger and mentally younger than previous generations. So that is something that we really need to understand here, that this new era is about pushing extra lives into the middle of life, not just tacking them on at the end. So when you ask the question, I hate to put it back to you with another question, but who are you trying to serve here? Are you trying to serve the middle plus, the age of these CEOs, or are you trying to serve the old? Because they are very two distinct populations with, for the most part, two very distinct needs.
Yeah, I think maybe not like one in in each and every case, but I was triggered by your comment about the C-suite people being maybe part of the age group technically, but maybe not having the empathy that you would expect. So I think in most cases it is the C-suite, but I get your point, and I think indeed personal experience probably works in most cases. But of course, it can also, I think probably not work in every case. Each and every case, definitely not in business.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I think when you're trying to tap into empathy, especially around selling business or talking to businesses, lean on some statistics that tend to work well. I can share those around when we're off the line. I think they're in the book for sure, but I want to get the numbers right, and I'm not going to do it if I try to pick from my head right now. But essentially, the number of health-related deficiencies that we have increases exponentially over time. So it's fairly expected that an individual who's in the C-suite will have some type of physical or cognitive decline at this point. The first thing to go is vision. I mean, I'm looking at the screen. Virtually everyone has glasses on, or at least half of us has glasses on, and some of us are probably just not wearing them today. But this challenge around vision, I think, has, no pun intended, opened the eyes of some businesses to suggest a new future. In fact, I cover a few of these businesses in the book, whether it be Caddis Eyewear, that's a business in California, New York, that's designing a modern reader that looks more like what I'm wearing now than what you'd find in the pharmacy, or the national retailer Warby Parker, which was one of the first online retailers for eyeglasses in the world. They make a progressive lens, and they've been doing so for 5 or 10 years now. And even, upstart companies like a New Orleans manufacturer called Crew, which is worn by the likes of Beyonce, that is making progressive lenses and readers. Like, these are kind of the tip of the spear. Automakers are the same. There are things that people know they want later in life. Find those out. People in this middle plus group are really intentional about their health. They're very intentional about the need to be seen as normal or exceptional. They don't want to be seen as falling behind the pack. We're pack animals at the end of the day. We're tribal people at the end of the day. We want to be in the center or ahead. We never want to fall behind. If we fall behind, and people can see us falling behind, if we're wearing beige colored devices, oversized phones with big buttons, that is a signal that we are no longer part of society. But hell, you got an iPhone on you, you're still cool. You're wearing an Apple Watch, you're awesome. You got a Peloton sitting in your living room, gathering dust, good for you. Like, all of these things are products that businesses do like at the end of the day. So focus on what the core needs of the middle plus are. Staying connected, staying healthy for longer periods of time. That's how you make money in this period. That's how you move business in this period.
All right, we have 3 more questions and we are short on time, so
It's okay. We can go a little over, but I definitely want to get to.
Okay, so we got
Ingen and
Ingen next, then Arthur, and then Ulrike again.
I think Irma had one too. I want to make sure we get to Irma as well. So we can go 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll do them quick.
Let's go.
Hi, thank you. Well, I was a little bit late, so I hope I'm not addressing something that you discussed in the first 15 minutes. But I'm really a fan of senior entrepreneurship, experienced entrepreneurship, or however we call it. The numbers are good. And what I feel is when we want to change what is happening in corporates or in government, that takes a lot of time, there's a lot of energy. So at the Wise Move Society, we're very much focused on creating our own opportunities and how can we start businesses instead of only focusing on how can we change something that is already there. So can you say anything about the numbers and the growth of senior entrepreneurship success rates?
So Engin, I wish I could give you good numbers. There aren't good numbers. The numbers are terrible around senior entrepreneurship, in large part because the government doesn't count them properly. And if there's anything Western governments do incredibly well, it's count things. We're so good at it, but for some reason, there's this massive hole around entrepreneurism and the gig economy. The gig economy makes sense, it's new. But with entrepreneurism, we should have a better grasp of things. What I'd like to do is connect you with Jeff Pearman. He's a colleague of mine in New Zealand. And Jeff has some really amazing insights on older workers, but he's been able to infer based on the data, the growth in the 50+ entrepreneur in the New Zealand economy, at least, and has an interesting methodology to get there. I think you should take a look at that. One of the pieces that we have to address head on and quickly amongst older people is the stigma around being an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are not just Steve Jobs, and the like. They're not people like Mark Zuckerberg. They're folks that are willing to hang up a shingle outside of their home as a consultant, perhaps drive a taxi or a hired car, maybe even open a cafe or start a handicraft on Etsy. Like, these are all entrepreneurs. We should normalize the fact that these people are entrepreneurs. And that might be a language issue on our own part that we need to tackle. For a lot of folks, they're just owning a small business. An entrepreneur has an elitist tone to it. But small business ownership, encouraging people to own small businesses, mom and pops, that's something that older folks tend to embrace. I think it's a language difference that we've got a hiccup on. But we should embrace it. We should encourage it. And I can tell you anecdotally here, at least, there's been an explosion of gig workers that are over 65 in my home city, just an explosion since the vaccines were rolled out. It's really remarkable. And I can only ask so many questions in an Uber, but the consistent theme is money and social connectivity is the reasons for people working. And sometimes it's a mix of the two.
Okay, thank you to Roy. He just mentioned in the chat there is a senior entrepreneurship program in Israel called Up 60+.
Yeah.
So that might be also interesting for you. So next question, Arthur from Aachen, one of our alumni. Hello.
Thank you very much. Hi, Frank. Hi, Bradley.
Hey.
Yeah, I already wrote the question to Frank. And what would be, it's a very generalistic question, so sorry about that. But what would be your single most important advice to prepare young leaders and entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs as we are, to set up our own workforce for the future? Because our way of thinking and our way of preparing basically our businesses tends to be very, very digital and very non-inclusive in parts of that.
Well, it's a good question, Arthur. I think there's kind of an immediate question you probably have is, what do you do now and what do you do next? I think right now businesses across the board have to look at a new business case. They have to compete for talent across the board on all age groups. And that's through benefits and through financial compensation. They have to augment their workforce with technology and artificial intelligence. They have to support each and every one of their workers with caregiving and flexible leave. If there's anything all workers love, it's flexible leave. And the third thing is they have to focus on extending working lives. And that's typically through ergonomics or lifelong education. So those are some critical investments that you should be making as a business today. But I'm going to tell you something revolutionary, and it's a big secret in hiring circles. Ask your employees what they want. It may sound so simple, but it is revolutionary. And the businesses that are really doing a phenomenal job, one that's mentioned in the book is Westpac, an Australian bank that offered the first in the world leave for grandparents. Because they listened to their tellers, and their tellers said, we want to stay employed, but we want to take time off to see our grandkids too. So these little things you can do to really extend the working lives of people happen because you have conversations with them. Keep that line of communication open, because going forward, competition will become fierce for employees regardless of their age. I think we have two more.
Two more, yeah.
Irma,
So it's
Irma,
Ulrike.
maybe?
Thank you.
So I have on my list Ulrike and Emanuela.
Yeah.
Ulrike, you're next.
Yes, I just wanted to give an answer to Inga also, because I've done a lot of senior business or senior target group business in fashion business as well. And we really had a lot of money coming in. We had 68% more sale. And I think it's also the best argument to say, if you sell, for instance, to young people, they will swap and give it back, even worn in the disco in the night, they will give it back to you. And if you have the elder or the best agers, or even the seniors, in this case, our population we had as a target group, they were over 65 in average. And well, they were paying at least 2,000 euro per year. And in the other case, we saw that the young people were paying €5 for a T-shirt, or maybe 3 of them in the year. So in the end, this is also something you can talk with clients about. And of course, I also see this one point from this one young alumni from Frank, or from, I don't see the name, but you were just talking just now.
Sato.
And I would recommend, I would recommend that you also think about employing people with lots of experience, people like me, because there's a lot of experience, and they have more to say than only that they are old and too expensive. And we heard it, I liked it that you told us that the people aren't so expensive. And that's exactly my experience. People talk to me a lot, and they tell me that they don't come that far to say how much salary they want. They aren't taken into the discussion. So in the end, it's only a prejudice. It's not the truth. And that's why I just wanted to say these two things. One point, think also from business, from higher pays. So for instance, fashion, that they give a lot of money for very good quality because they want to keep their things longer. They stay in the companies longer, they are loyal, and they are very, very well educated. And in the case of Germany, they can speak German. And the second thing is, if it is necessary, I mean, maybe we say we want to speak English in future, but if we want to speak German and we want to have written down German, good written down German, then it is a case to say, take the old ones, they had that at school and they can do it. And why don't you take them just to write the things down, whatever. But digital is the biggest gap I see, because now in Germany, we are putting off everything and putting it all into digital transformation. And if I see my mother, she's 85, and we put her on the phone, we put her in the WhatsApp group, but we don't get her that far that she doesn't have every 2 months. She is blocked by Apple because they say there's a wrong lady trying to take away this phone because she always gives in the wrong passwords and whatever. So it is not all possible. You can't teach people everything. And she's very intelligent. She was teaching herself.
I certainly think you raised some good points there. And Arthur, that might be one touch point in terms of reaching out to a business is showing them the opportunities that exist, with an older consumer base. Consistently across the board, regardless of geography, there is a digital gap, and it's pretty significant. There are great case studies in the UK. Barclays comes to mind, where you can they taught older populations how to use technology in the banks themselves. So there's a great opportunity for partnerships here. The companies that are really interested in this are financial services, insurance companies, obviously automotive, but it's expanding really quickly. I want to get Irma's question because I know she's had her hand up a couple of times, Frank, if that's okay.
Absolutely, Emanuela, let's go.
Hi, I'm Irma. I'm here
Hello, I'm from Italy. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We'll get,
Your turn.
sorry, we'll get to you
Understand.
next, Emanuela.
Okay, great. So my name is Irma. I'm from Lithuania, Vilnius. I'm the founder of the startup Gen for Gen, which is Generation for Generation. And basically we help 50 plus people to get back to workspace. So I do meet and work a lot with employers and potential employees. And what I realize here, a few things, and I would like Bradley to, if you can comment on that. What I hear from employers, basically corporates, if I ask, for example, so why wouldn't you hire 50 plus? Basically, they say two things. For us, it's very important that the person would integrate perfectly in a team. And if the team is, I would say the average age is, let's say, 28, they see as a barrier for older people to be in a company. Another thing, what they point out, I do believe it's a kind of, business traditions and cultures, and that differ in different countries. But what they point out is that, like they say, like, Irma, look, these older people are very nice, they are very experienced, but they are very categorical, and it will be very difficult to lead them because they already know everything and they won't do what we ask. So that's really like comments I hear every second time I meet with CIOs or HR departments. And second part is this, as I call supply side, potential employees. They have lots of problems. I mean, the self-confidence, the self-esteem is very low. And I mean, they would probably fail in the interviews if they are not prepared for that. So that's my feedback, what I see here, and what I get. So if you can comment here.
Well, I mean, I think what we all have a role to play in this demographic transition, and I certainly appreciate the work that you're doing. I know that it's an uphill battle with some employers in particular. Also, if you've been a victim of ageism, it doesn't happen just once. It happens, by 1,000 cuts, as we would say. It's death, not death by a single blow, it's death by 1,000 cuts. So that just means that there are these little indignities that build up over time and can really erode a person's self-worth. Within businesses, like I said, we are fighting up a hill right now around ageism. I worked for an organization that represented older people, and my own boss wouldn't give an interview to somebody who was in their 70s, in large part because he was overqualified. And I found that to be repulsive. But that still is the standard, as troubling as it is. For individuals, I think you've heard my comments earlier, individuals do have to play a major role in this. They have to pick themselves up and make themselves competitive in the labor market. They have a role to do if they're going to fight for their position. And this is not something new. Let me make that abundantly clear here. Cicero, who's one of the great Roman thinkers around old age, said that old people essentially have to fight for every inch they can take so they don't become marginalized in society. And this is thousands of years ago. It still rings true today. So if older people aren't fighting for themselves, very few people are going to fight for them. I think we have a question from Emanuela next. And I think that'll probably have to be our last one.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, Bradley.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you. I wanted to know whether you have a suggestion about which angle I should use when I talk about longevity or the longevity economy in the country that has the most dramatic ratio of elders over young people. They all react by saying, why do you care about older people? We have a big problem with young people. And I can't find a way to make them understand that the longevity economy could be a leverage
Yeah,
for
I have to be honest with you. I hate the term longevity economy.
Yeah, I know.
I know I'll probably get my hand slapped for that, but I don't like the term. I think it's silly to lump centenarian with a 50-year-old, just like I think it's silly to lump a newborn with a 50-year-old. Now, it's a good talking point to open the door, but there are a lot of underlying questions that exist within the longevity economy. The single biggest being that people who earn the most in the longevity economy are people that are still employed, 50 to 74s. And they earn the lion's share of the longevity economy. They earn 3/4 of it. They're responsible for 3/4 of that economic activity. So when you're talking about older populations, I mean, I give a little side eye to the longevity economy, and I'm an expert. I just think it's a false premise. It's a good marketing tool, but it's a false premise. I like to talk to businesses about expanding their consumer base. That's a language that they understand because it's not otherism. It's not about just talking about this other group that they want to serve, that they never have that they might want to serve, that they've never served, that they have an initial bias against. I talk about expanding consumer base and expanding market share. And in a country like Italy in particular, where the population is contracting in some places, I was just there over the Christmas holiday and was shocked at how few people there are in the hill towns. Well, there's no tourists right now. It really shows what depopulation looks like. And there were plenty of older workers in the cafes that were open, the businesses that were open. This will happen naturally over time, but I think if you want to engage consumer businesses in particular, you have to talk about expanding consumer base. You have to talk about expanding market opportunity. You have to talk about building organizational resilience. Don't talk about older workers. Don't talk about older consumers as your entry point. That immediately turns folks off. It doesn't mean you can't talk about it eventually, but you have to play with the bias that exists in the marketplace today so we can fight against it in the future. And on that note, I want to make sure that you all do a few things for me today. If you haven't bought the book already, please do. It's available on Amazon as well as national and local retailers. Please, please, please write a review on Amazon in particular, but also if you could on Goodreads or your local sites. And then please, please, please post to social media, and you can tag me, Bradley Sherman, or the Super Age. I really appreciate all of you joining today. A special thanks, of course, to Frank for hosting this gathering, one of 3 across the world, and really want to extend deep thanks to our launch partners in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Thank you so much. And the questions today, folks, were just amazing. I hope you follow up with me in the future. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't done so already. But please, my email is bradley@thesuperage.com, which I'll put in the chat right now. You can reach out to me wherever and whenever you want. I try to respond as soon as possible. Frank, do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you very much. I mean, we align on a lot of thinkings. I can just recommend buy the book. It's really worth it, even if you already are in the field. It's really a lot of good wide information, and I'm looking forward maybe later the year to see you in person. That would be my closing remark.
Frank, you just went mute.
Thank you. I was happy that doesn't happen to me today. Anyway, no remarks from my side. Thank you for taking the time with us. Hope to see you in person later the year. And to all the German and Austrian and Switzerland folks, share the voice about the Innovation Award. If you know a startup who does good business, they can apply till June. This session is recorded. We will put it on the Innovation Award site, and I will share Bradley's email. If you don't get it already, I think they are out there. Have a good day. Stay healthy, and we go through it. Bradley, success with your book. Good to see you.
Ciao. Tschüss.